until we find a way to settle the war inside of ourselves, we're still going to see things dualistically. As soon as we see things dualistically, we're going to project and we're going to discharge, and there's going to be blame. And I think this is one of the reasons in this country, at least right now, why there can't even be a conversation anymore.
Joy DeAndrea offers a unique and personally developed modality of working with what she feels lies at the very source of who we are as human beings. Joy integrates her training and knowledge of energy healing, psychology, and various other schools of thought and has been in private practice, teaching and hosting workshops internationally for more than 25 years. Her work is based on the concept that all healing originates in our longing for unity. And today she's going to be talking on the subject of anger and how we can transform anger into life force. Thank you, Joy, for joining me today. It's so good to see you.
So good to see you, Stacy.
So we're here today to talk about anger.
Everybody's favorite subject.
So let's dive right in. What kind of sparked your interest in holding workshops on anger and to diving into this topic?
In the workshops that I've done in the past 20 years, let's say, I have really been zeroing in on subjects and emotions that most people find challenging, sometimes wanting to avoid, sometimes really having very strong reactions to, anger being one of them, probably at the top of the list, because there is so much around the emotion of anger that we experience from many different perspectives. I think we all have work to do around how we be with this emotion. So much of what we see in the world is a distortion of the emotion of anger. And that always piques my interest because I do believe that healing is about unity and starting with unity within each of us, which means being able to welcome all of the emotions that we have and experience as human beings. Anger is certainly one of them.
Can you tell us a little bit about the distortions that you see
Mhm,
sort of in the world or maybe in your practice or
mhm. Well, there's many different relationships that we have with anger, but I think most of what we see that is distorted is a misunderstanding that somehow anger is connected to violence. And we certainly see a lot of that where anger and the expression or the discharge of anger winds up being seen in our society, in our world, as something violent, something to stay away from, something to suppress. There's also the cultural belief systems around anger, there's gender expectations around anger. And all of these things, if not brought into conscious awareness, create a certain amount of distortion with the emotion.
and how do you why do you think anger is associated with violence? Kind of, I mean, to me, it feels almost instinctive,
Mhm,
but again, it could be some kind of programming that I received
mhm,
early on. But and it's gotten better, but when I'm in the room with somebody who's angry, even if it's someone I don't know and they're not angry with
mhm,
me, my nervous system starts to get a little shaky and I want to leave.
mhm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Our early imprinting around anger will dictate our transference to it, our reaction to it based on history. If you've grown up in a family where anger is something that was freely expressed, where it was not violent, one will have a very different reaction to anger coming into the room or into relationship than someone who saw anger discharged in a way where there was physical violence or emotional trauma. The nervous system remembers that, associates the energy of anger with something that is harmful. And I think all one has to do is really look at world events right now in this country and in some other countries to see where there is such a strong connection between what we experience as anger and violence.
Yeah, I'm so curious about that. I mean, I think, from because yes, what we see in the media, what we see in entertainment,
Hmm.
anger is, I would say, 99% of the time associated with violence or some kind of
Hmm.
abuse.
Hmm.
Would you agree with that?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
so I wonder how we as a species can, look at it differently. How can we make that switch from welcoming anger? Well, I don't know. Are we welcoming anger, or is there a certain kind of anger that we're welcoming?
Hmm.
Is it up to the person who is angry to kind of modulate the way that they express their anger, or is it up to the person receiving the anger to hold themselves differently, or both?
Hmm. All of those things. Actually, every single thing you mentioned is relevant and part of what we look at when it comes to anger. Primarily, we need to look first at our relationship, our imprinting around anger, how we experience that emotion in our young life, and how we then see the world through that lens, because we do. Then we also look at how anger is developed in the system, how it's met as children during the stages of development. Were we allowed to aggress and push up against another? Did we receive what they call optimum indulgence and optimum frustration? Were we allowed to experience that in our systems? If we fast forward to our life now, how we finding the tools, learning the tools to experience anger in our own system, learning about how our system is wired with that emotion, being able to use tools to slow down, to pay attention, to know our impulses to either discharge or direct anger inside, that starts to shift our relationship to it. Then, of course, we need to look at, what does anger look like in relationship? What is our transference when we're with someone who is angry or we're angry? How do we communicate in a way that the anger is not discharged towards another person in an unhealthy way? And starting to look at different things like, what is it like when an authority, someone you perceive as an authority, gets angry? How does that respond to you? How does your relationship with anger change if you're in a position of power? So there's so many different layers of this that I feel are very rich territory as far as self-healing goes. And also just, how do we be in this world with so much anger and be able to use the creative energy of anger in a way that does not hurt, but has the ability to transform?
Mm. Yeah, I
I don't
can
know if I
really.
answered all of your question, but
You
there
said
was a
so
lot
many. I
there.
wrote down like 10 more questions based on what you just said, but that the last part you shared was really juicy. I could really feel that,
Mhm.
transforming the anger into
Mhm.
creativity. But I just want to back up for just a minute because going back to, sort of the classic angry person that we
Mhm.
tend to avoid. I'm trying to figure out, and if you have a better way of sort of, I'll edit this part out, but if you have a better way of kind of taking us through, your teaching, please feel free to interrupt me. So I'm kind of
Okay.
going based on what you've
Mhm.
shared and what's coming up for me. But
Mhm.
um, you know, I I'm so curious about, yes, we see a lot of anger getting discharged in the world.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I'm curious how how we're supposed to deal with that. So maybe there's two parts. What's going
Mhm.
on for that really angry person that's discharging it, whether it's, in their own home or whether it's out in the world, whether it's in politics or some other field.
Mhm.
Yeah, let's start there. What's
Okay.
happening for that person?
I think almost anything could be happening for them. Clearly, there is something very uncomfortable in their system. There's something that there's some need in there that they feel is either being threatened or compromised or not given space for. And it's challenging because most people don't have these skills, and anger is so easily just discharged.
So for anyone listening who has an anger issue or been to, has been told they have, kind of a quick
Mhm.
temper, um, what would be your recommendation for that? If that person would wanted to actually shift how they express their.
Mhm. Well, you're singing to the band here. I mean, I have a quick temper. I've always had a quick temper. I can get angry pretty quickly. It's taken a lot of time and work to break down and understand more why I get so reactive sometimes. And I think the first thing when we're with someone who's angry or we get angry, the first thing is to recognize what are the changes that are starting to happen? Is there an anxiousness in the system? Is there a speeded up heartbeat? Is there a wanting to push your energy out? And being able to track and witness that, being able to be aware that something is happening inside of you and to take a breath and to take a breath and to slow down and to be curious rather than follow the impulse. We all have impulses with anger, either fight, flight, or freeze, usually,
Mm.
because it's not an emotion that generally has been welcomed and an emotion that we're generally comfortable with.
So it's interesting because I feel like anger carries both a sense of satisfaction, like I mean, when I'm in the car driving by myself, I love to get angry at other drivers. It's like this release, and there's nobody there to criticize me for how angry I'm getting. And yet, there's a little bit of shame. So, I mean, obviously, because I can only do it by myself in the car, so I'm wondering if that makes it if that's what makes it difficult for people to change. If the shame that is connected with anger is what makes it
Mhm,
difficult for people to turn the corner.
mhm. I think it's a number of things, Stacy. What you mentioned is the pleasure of the discharge. There are all different ways that people have been working with anger, from anger management to intellectualizing it to some types of personal work that use batakas or hitting. It's a discharge when your system is holding anger and it accumulates anger, things that we perhaps feel little angers about, but we're not comfortable addressing them. So it kind of, we fill the pot up, right? And then it's like we get in the car and you see so much of road rage right now. And I I always say it's terrifying. I was at a party last week and one of the ladies there said she gets in the car and she feels like everybody that gets in their car and says, "Who am I going to kill today?"
Mm,
And you experience it so much when there's this discharge, and not people that quietly get a thrill out of it like you expressed, Stacy, but that actually, cut people off and tailgate and, give the finger or yell a profanity. And the discharge feels good because we're not processing the anger as it comes up. Perhaps
mm,
because we haven't learned to process the anger as it comes up, or we've learned it's not appropriate. And
mm,
a lot of times it's not. If somebody irritates you at the bank or irritates you at a supermarket, you don't necessarily want to discharge the anger at that person. Most of us know enough to say, that's not appropriate in this moment. But at the same time, we don't get in the car and sit and say, now, why did I get so triggered here? What really bothered me that I wanted to discharge anger at this person?
Mm.
and be able to slow down and break that down so that we can really understand what was happening underneath the anger. Because anger is usually sitting on top of another emotion.
Mm. So before we get to what that emotion might be,
Hmm.
that's a good example of, a person at a bank. How do we make that switch from, being holding that anger, walking out of the bank, having
Hmm.
held on to it,
Hmm.
not discharged it, getting in the car, and then instead of driving off and flipping somebody off, how do we
Hmm.
flip the switch within us, let's say?
Right. It's a process, and it's a process that I have developed certain tools to work with. So, for example, really simple example of somebody irritating one in the bank or the supermarket, wanting to do something and not being allowed to do something, let's say at the bank, and get into the car and realize that, okay, there's some part of me that wanted to discharge my anger with this person. And I get into the car and I say, okay, let me take a breath. Let me track what's going on in my body right now. And let me just slow down and get a sense of what's here in this energy that wants to find a target. So that's what it's looking to do. And as I sit there, I start to sense into what really happened here. Well, I was told I couldn't do something I wanted to do. Okay, that's enough to frustrate me, to want me to discharge something. What is that like in my system? Well, it's very reminiscent of when I had an impulse or I wanted something and somebody said no. And then there's not so much anger anymore, but there's sadness around that. And there's memories around that. And I start to have the feeling in my body of what it's like when somebody says no to something I want. And if I go deeper than that, I have a sense of maybe in my young life, I felt like I really wasn't heard, or what
Mm.
I wanted really wasn't considered. And then it brings me into a softer sort of pain where I'm not interested in discharging that anymore, but I am more focused on taking care of that part of myself. And then from there, I can access what I call positive aggression, which is a form of anger that says, okay, what do I need to do here now to find a way to go back into the bank and find a different way to obtain what I was looking for to begin with?
Mm.
And then that's just a very simple example of transforming anger into something that's more creative. Because then I start thinking, okay, what do I need to do? Where was the bank right? Why was that conflict there? And what do I need to do to find a different way? And then
Mm.
I'm actually using positive aggression, which is a healthy form of anger, to secure something that I want.
So it sounds like dealing with one's own anger is a deep practice and
Hmm.
a deep commitment,
Yes.
and also requires, I would say, a lot of self-love.
Yeah. And the skills are important, but the self-love is really making that space for there was something I was needing here that I didn't get. So I'm curious, for you, Stacy, when you mentioned that there's shame here, and that certainly is still sitting with me, and I'm curious about that. Where anger or the expression of anger or even the discharge of anger brings up a sense of badness in ourselves, a place where we feel like we need to be ashamed.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think it's for me personally, I would say also culturally, it's not okay for women to get angry,
Mhm.
certainly not in public. Um,
Women were called hysterics, right?
right, we were, yes. So don't even get me started on that. Um, yes. And also it's you know, we touched on gender, but it does in our culture, and I'm maybe most cultures. I don't know of any where this is, or maybe you know of one, but where it's okay for men to express anger and aggression.
Hmm.
It's almost expected, and it's kind of weird if they don't. But for women to do the same, is not okay. So I think for me, that's where the shame comes in. Certainly growing up, I did express anger, and even if it was welcome or if it was tolerated in the moment, it was shamed later.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, you know, but I think also just then stepping out into the world as a young person, I grew up in a very angry household,
Hmm.
so a lot of conflict did get resolved with a bit of a push,
Hmm.
and stepping out into the world, I mean, I grew up in New York. So, and it's different because it's sort of like
Hmm.
it's in the air, it's in the culture. We're kind of used
Hmm.
to moving this way, right? And
Yeah.
then I went to school in Virginia and I realized it was like I landed on a different planet.
Hmm.
There was so yeah, there was just this kind of like a huge cultural difference
Hmm.
between male and female, especially when it came to expressing emotions like
Hmm.
anger. Women
Yeah.
were sweet and soft and always kind. Um, you know, I
Yeah,
may be
it's
biased,
amazing.
but
Yeah. No, it really is amazing. I mean, there's what happened in your family and your environment there. There's what the cultural imprinting is. There's the societal imprinting. There's the gender imprinting. And I think we are an amalgam of all of these things and how to again just really, and it's so individual to each person. I've worked with anger with people for many, many years in different cultures, and it really is fascinating to see how each person is so uniquely tuned, and how there's not a one fits all way to work with anger. It is, I think the tools are applicable across the board because they're so basic and simple, not easy, but simple. But I think each person's ability to take in the information and really pinpoint where in their process they want to apply the skills is essential, because one does have to live in society. And there are certain, in different places in the world, there are different templates. There are different things that are appropriate. I share my time between, I live in New York, I live in Italy, and I travel to Japan twice a year. I experience anger differently in all three places because the templates are so different.
mm. Can you give us a little snapshot of what it's like in each of those places?
Yeah, in New York, the anger certainly has a sharper edge to it. I think things are quick here. Things move very fast here. I think that when I get in the car, like the ability to drive and be with all of that around me, I just hold my field very differently. It seems to have more structure. My energy body seems to have more structure and more a different way of interacting. When I'm in Italy, there's the emotional body is so much more expanded, and anger is held in a very fluid way rather than the sharpness that I feel in New York. So right away, my emotional body shifts again, and anger is softer. It's more fluid. It's more organic. When I go to Japan, there is such a distinctly different template to that Eastern culture where anger is held completely differently, and what's appropriate or not appropriate as far as expressing anger is very, very different. It is held in an extremely, it's almost like a filigree sort of way.
Hmm.
So there's a fineness to it. Again, it's there, but it's experienced very, very differently. I find I hardly ever get angry in Japan. I mean,
Hmm.
there's almost nothing to get angry about when I'm there. which is amazing. And that has a whole lot to do with the culture. But I also find that uh, the way my energy body is there, my emotional body is there, is completely different again.
Mm.
So it is fascinating because, again, the many different layers to this.
Yeah. I think we're all familiar with, what it looks like, unhealthy expression of anger.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
what does healthy expression of anger look like?
I think a healthy expression of anger is being able to advocate for ourselves, to be able to set healthy boundaries, to be able to manifest our longings in the world. I think there is, when we talk about things like civil rights or changing, really changing and progressing and evolving, I think the passion of injustice and wanting to shift injustice to something healthy is an incredibly powerful and healthy expression of anger.
There's certainly a lot of different conversations going on,
Hmm.
for social justice right now.
Yeah.
What do you see as it doesn't seem healthy to me.
It's
You know,
not, it's not,
yeah.
it's not.
What is a in order to affect change, what is I don't know if we want to go global,
Hmm.
or stay with the individual. And then the other question I have that I think relates to this is, in order to express anger in a healthy way, are we kind of taking a time out for ourselves? If we're feeling really sort of jacked up about something,
Hmm.
which is there's a lot of that right now going on
Yeah,
in
yeah,
public. So do we kind of take a step back? How do we make
yeah.
sure we're not wounding others and ourselves?
I think it really depends on the situation, and I think it depends on our own skill set to be able to, how quickly one is able to get to the source and be able to communicate and be very clear that there's no intention to project and discharge the anger. Anger that's expressed, and I've seen it in the moment. I've been able to experience it in the moment sometimes where there's something that's unfolding that's so outrageous that the energy in that moment really is asking to be presenced, but it needs to be grounded, it needs to be contained, and it needs to have an intention to do no harm. So we really start to work with intention when it comes to uh, what I say conscious communication, and anger being one of the emotions that we may need to be in communication with someone around, being able to really be very clear about our intention. And, very often the intention with anger is to get something from someone, to force our way into something, to get our way around something, which is a lot of distorted masculine energies, what we see in the world right now, distorted masculine energy. But when there is clear intention to communicate something that one has passion around, that doesn't push anybody away. That doesn't overtake anyone. It's a pure expression.
Hmm.
And anger just may be one of the emotions that's in there. I think passion has a lot, very often, a lot of anger.
So I'm
Hmm.
curious about, the connection between, um, if you want to speak to this, anger and blame, and how, especially in the discussions around social justice with all that's going
Hmm.
on in the world.
So blame is the discharge of anger. Simple. As soon as we're blaming, we're discharging anger and responsibility onto someone else and something else. And this is why I say there's so much distortion in the expression of anger right now, because we're still seeing anger and expressing anger and trying to transform something, evolve past something by blaming and holding duality. It's not going to happen that way. And I come back to the individual, like I think and this is a far reach, and I know how small the percentage of people that do this type of work is in the world. But until we find a way to settle the war inside of ourselves, we're still going to see things dualistically. And as soon as we see things dualistically, we're going to project and we're going to discharge, and there's going to be blame. And I think this is one of the reasons in this country, at least right now, why there can't even be a conversation anymore. There's so much blame and there's so much projection and there's so much good and bad and good and evil and right and wrong that there's not even enough common ground to come to the table anymore, which is very, I don't have words for it, sad, tragic at this stage in our development, and I know that as a species we're trying to evolve, or else there wouldn't be so much chaos and conflict around us. But we're not going to do it the old way. We can't do it with this dualistic, you have to do it my way.
Yeah, and I find that blame is seems to be a very common tactic, no matter what
Mhm.
side of the
Yeah.
spectrum,
Yep.
what part of the spectrum you're on. And I'm just curious, um, how does blame hit the system in a general way for a human?
They want to fight.
Mhm.
They're going to get angry or they're going to feel bad and collapse,
Mm.
right? Depending on how we dealt with blame as a child. Yeah. And whether there was permission to push back or whether we then directed those feelings inside and felt even worse about ourselves. It usually goes one way or the other.
So
And
generally, when you're blamed for something, you're not going to go, "Oh yeah, let me look into that," right?
not usually, because it's usually been done in a way that is shaming,
Hmm.
that is diminishing. You know, I think parents are much more evolved now than they were when I was growing up, but you, I didn't hear a lot of what's happening for you
Hmm.
ever,
Yeah.
ever. I don't remember ever hearing that question. It was assumed, and then it was reprimanded or made fun of or told to go someplace else.
Yeah, so we're seeing the fruits of our authoritarian culture.
We absolutely are, and our patriarchy,
Hmm.
to some extent, our patriarchy.
Right. And I also just want to clarify when you say patriarchy and you say, the masculine energy, you're not just talking about men, right?
No, 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 no. I am talking about the system that we live in, and I am talking about each of us has a feminine and masculine aspect. We have a relationship with our masculine, we have a relationship with our feminine. And the type of aggression we see is a distortion of masculine energy. My masculine can do that if I choose to. And at
Mm.
the same time, I could choose to use my masculine energy to have positive aggression, to set boundaries, to advocate for myself. Those are all ways I would use my healthy masculine energy.
So we looked at distortions, blame,
Hmm.
shame, duality, all the violence, things that we see in the world that just create more destruction, right?
Hmm.
Separation. Um, Can we get a little bit into positive aggression and what that means?
Hmm.
Because those are not two words that I would naturally put together. So,
It's interesting that you say that. Forget forget who I was working with. I was working with someone in my practice who wouldn't even tolerate the word aggression.
mm,
And aggression can be negative and it could be positive. Negative aggression harms. Negative aggression hurts. Negative aggression is violent. Positive aggression is using healthy masculine energy to motivate, whether you're motivating for change, you're motivating to take care of yourself, you're motivating to set healthy boundaries for yourself, you have felt an injustice and you want to really try to set that straight, it's hard to function in a healthy way in this world without positive aggression. And again, aggression is a word like anger. Automatically, there is going to be a transference towards it
Mm.
because of, again, what we believe, what we have understood it to be, what it's been mirrored to be for us. People say aggressive energy, it's usually a bad thing. Aggressive energy could be quite a good thing.
Mm.
You can't change anything without aggressing in a positive way.
Hmm. And we see a lot of masking of that, right? A lot of
Absolutely.
holding in.
Yeah. And I guess I go back to, what you said about shame and where very often when one feels angry, they feel like they don't know what to do with that energy and they wind up very often feeling helpless or hopeless or that there's no place for it because they've been told for such a long time, or they understand on some level like there is no place for it. They've been raised with that belief, whatever the imprinting is, and how to find a way to understand that impulse is healthy. There's nothing wrong with it. And there is a way to learn to be with your emotions so that you can have a voice that this is not something that's bad. This is not something that one has to feel shame or guilt around
Or
or
fear.
hopelessness or fear. Yeah, yeah, fear. Fear is a little more difficult because of the we work actively with the fear, and being able to slow down and know that what I'm afraid of is really a transference from my past and not. Now, there are times when you may actually feel like you're in physical danger when somebody's angry, and then you want to be able to take care of yourself and remove yourself from a situation. We don't want to engage if we're actually in a situation where our life is in danger or there's somebody who's pathological that is directing anger at us, and that really is one has to have the discernment because without the discernment, we don't know. Everything feels dangerous or nothing feels dangerous, depending on our relationship with anger. So
Mm.
we want the discernment. Do I engage with this and try to have a conversation, or do I take care of myself and get away? It's
Mm.
important discernment. And most of us, again, without a deeper dive into our relationship with anger personally, it's hard to have that discernment.
Mm.
That's important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really huge one because is anger one of the emotions that you would say is the most suppressed, regardless of the culture? Because you talked about New York,
Hmm.
Italy,
Yeah.
Japan.
I would say probably, uh, I'd say a close second would be shame.
Mm.
Shame is something that I think there's even more of a sense of isolating it.
And those often go together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because shame is anger directed inward, like what you described, getting in the car and having that discharge and then feeling shame. It's like, oh, wow, I had this expression of anger and now I'm bad for it. So I have to feel shame around it.
Hmm.
Right. So it's like this, it gets projected out. And then there's like, oh my God, that was bad. And I directed it. So,
So I wonder what piece of that is, especially, on this healing path, right?
mhm.
What part of that is trying to be a good person, you know? And how does that get in the way of healthy expression of anger?
I think it's a really good question. It came up in a group that I was with yesterday where good is mask
Mm.
right away. As soon as we say, I'm going to be a good person, there's duality. So I have to separate myself from what's bad, even what's bad in me. And that goes into the shadow. And if a good person doesn't feel anger, all the anger sits in the shadow. So even this verbiage of be a good person automatically sets us into a duality. What about being a real person? What
Mm.
about being an authentic person? What about just being a person?
Where there's no good and bad, but it's integrated into,
Right,
yeah.
right. Because anger can be defined as good or bad depending what lens you're looking at it through.
Hmm.
But in and of itself, it has no value one way or the other, has no weight one way or the other. It's what we attribute to it. And then how do we hold that in our system?
And can you talk about a little bit about the, looking inward and how feelings of anger or suppressed anger, usually come back to some unmet needs? Maybe there's an example you.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, the anger we experience in our everyday life is usually what I call secondary anger, which means it's sitting on top of something else. So, very often when we feel anger, if we stay with it, as I described earlier in the example, and ask a couple of questions, very often underneath the anger are feelings of either sadness or fear.
Mm.
And every feeling is connected to an emotion. Every feeling is connected to a need, I meant to say. And when we have good feelings, whatever need is connected with it, we feel pretty much as satisfied. If we have a feeling and it's an inconvenient feeling or a feeling that's uncomfortable for us or brings pain to us, then it's usually connected to a need that is not fulfilled.
Mm.
And if we start to go beneath the anger to the feeling, and we're able to stay with that to have it address the need, then we start to get closer to, I'm going to say, the wound of not having a need fulfilled. And once we get to that place, anger is held in a very different way. You see this with little babies. They get enraged when they don't have a need fulfilled. Now, that has nothing to do with anybody else because nobody else really exists at that point in time. They're not really directing it at mom. They're not directing it at the world. They are enraged because they are hungry or they are wet or they have an earache or they have gas. They are enraged. They have a little 5-month-old downstairs, and I think she had a terrible time with colic. And this little one would scream for hours sometimes. And it was heartbreaking because I was like, she is so enraged around something she's needing and she's not getting. And it's heartbreaking to listen to. But but at the same time, the amount of life force in that little body that is just totally focused on having that need met is what I'm talking about when I say that anger can be transformed to creativity, to creative essence. It's such a powerful emotion if we can distill it down to the core of what's really happening. And whether that's our need to be safe, our need to have contact, our need to be connected to what feels ethically important. And that's the energy we can use to transform, to create, to really have an impact in the world. And again, that anger has nothing to do with anybody. It is
Yeah,
just pure energy.
mm. I'm curious where disappointment fits in that
Hmm.
because, oftentimes we're angry about a situation, but there's really nothing.
Hmm.
We have no control, and that
Right.
can lead to
Yeah.
anger.
Disappointment is always connected to expectation.
Mm,
So part of working with this is, and we're wired to expect outcome. A plus B equals C. We are so quickly wired to expect something for everything we do. And no matter how much we work with it, it can get very subtle. So, in order to manage disappointment, we really have to keep an eye on what our expectations are and keep bringing conscious awareness to that.
and would you say live in the good enough?
Sometimes,
Yeah.
I think our ability to surrender to reality sometimes, to surrender, and this is something that people get real angry about, right? The world is not the way I want it to be. My life is not the way I want it to be. Everything I want doesn't show up the way I want it to show up, and so much energy around that, anger around that, and it's nothing to do with that. It's like we come back here. What's really going on? Am I sad? Am I disappointed because I put so much expectation on what I think the world is going to give to me or how my life is going to unfold?
Mm,
And it is an important emotion. And if that is the emotion that's sitting underneath the anger, then really looking at, okay, in my disappointment, what do I need? What do I really need here? Do I need love? Do you mentioned before self-love? Very often underneath disappointment is a need for love and contact. And it's like, okay, how do I hold myself with love even though I'm faced with disappointment, sometimes over and over again, because the world isn't responding to me the way I expected it would or I'd want it to. So, really important. I think that's one of the important emotions that sometimes sit underneath anger that comes right back to, self-love. And once one is able to actually acknowledge that and feel the pain of that, the softness of that, okay, then what does that energy want to do?
hmm
Very often if we satisfy or secure that need for love, it's like then we have another wave of, well, let me try again. I'm worth trying again. And then we can use that positive aggression to come back into the world and try again.
And I want
Makes
to get back
sense?
to, yes, I want to get back to positive aggression.
Hmm.
But I just want to also, before that, talk about, the sadness and fear that you named that are often, the emotions underneath anger.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and I'm just curious, why do those get buried underneath anger? Is it just easier or is it more acceptable to display anger than it is sadness or fear?
It's a good question. I think people very often, there's such discomfort in feeling feelings. And anger is something that we've kind of been taught we can discharge it and feel better. So if I have to sit with the sadness, if I have to sit with the fear and learn to tolerate and welcome that into my body and welcome that into my consciousness system because it's part of who I am, that can be really uncomfortable and really time consuming. And sometimes it's easier just to blame somebody else. A lot easier to discharge it sometimes than be with the feelings. Feelings are it's challenging to be with, to welcome all of that moving through our system.
And is that because we can sort of push it out, whereas sadness and
Mhm.
fear we have to feel inside our system?
Yeah, yeah, primarily. Yeah.
And what are, again, the main benefits of going into that sadness and fear and allowing ourselves to experience it?
If we go into the sadness and fear, we're able to then connect to the need that's there.
Mm.
And if we're able to connect to the need that's there, then we can also find a way to secure that need. So it's a healing response in our own system because the need is connected to a wound, right? So we have anger, we have the feeling, we have the need, we have the wound. And offering the healing response, securing the need, there's something that happens in that healing that then allows our life force to come forward again in a different way. And
Mm.
that's the transformation.
Can you give a hypothetical or a real life example of, moving through that,
Mhm.
um, what would you call it, process from
Yeah.
anger I guess that is the process from anger to life force, right?
hmm Yeah, I think I did it before with the bank thing, which
Okay.
was a very kind of simple, very
Hmm.
simplistic thing to follow. I think sometimes it's more complex depending on how comfortable someone is moving into those layers of consciousness. I will say that I feel that this level of work is generally directed towards folks that have done some personal work, that have an ability to be able to witness and track their own process to some extent.
Hmm. That
I
makes
mean,
sense.
it's always present in my practice, and I work with newbies as well. But I'd say it's a more advanced sort of process.
Let's say one has a client, who's suppressed anger.
hmm
What are some clues that anger is present without it
hmm
being expressed?
hmm Sarcasm,
Mhm.
blame, complaining in a loop, finding the same script, even though there are different stories.
Mhm.
Sometimes it is, uh, if you want to talk about something like projective identification, you start to feel angry as the
Mhm.
facilitator, and somehow you're feeling the other person's anger, passive aggressiveness, pushback. You ask a question and it's received in a way that feels like they're pushing back
Mhm.
again, in an aggressive way. Yeah. It also can look just like zoning out. But again, very often that the practitioner starts to feel the anger and the frustration.
Mhm.
And you have to really start asking, is this mine or is this theirs? Because it's usually unconscious, right? It's unconscious that the client would be doing that. But if you start to feel angry and it's not something you generally feel with someone, start to look at, okay, whose anger is this really?
And how do you work with that as a practitioner? Do you name
Pretty
it?
much like I work with
You say
everything
you're
else.
angry?
It depends. I remember really, really early in my practice. I mean, I probably am talking about the first 6 months I was practicing. I too quickly said to someone, "Are you angry?" And was on the receiving end of like a real explosion. And it was like, oh my gosh, that was not good.
Mm.
So it's such delicate territory to to be with. When one comes in and they're actively angry. I try more than anything else. I try to just hold the ground and allow whoever I'm working with to be able to find their way to name what's going on for them.
Mhm.
Now, with that kind of case of projective identification, I might actually say, wow, I'm just like feeling a lot of movement of energy in my system. I might not define it as anger, but I might just make an observation, a process observation with that person, and see if that invites them to say more.
Do you find that in your experience, people are resistant to hearing that they hold anger?
Absolutely, nobody wants to hear that.
Mm.
It's interesting in some cultures, in the Japanese culture, there is such a stigma around the emotion of anger that even to have someone say, I'm angry, can sometimes take the better part of a session.
Mm.
Very often, again, different in different cultures. I'm just picking that one because I work a lot with it. Very often I'll hear things like, I don't like this. And I'll say, what is it that you don't like? I don't like this. It's like, is it that what you're feeling that you don't like? Yeah, I don't like what's here. I was like, wow. So what is some of the sensations? And eventually we may work to, I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'm feeling frustrated. It's like, wow, that sounds like you may have some anger. Then there might be an acknowledgement. But it's so, again, it's so different with each person. I really do, I never want to lose sight of the fact that every human being, even though we have the same feelings, are so unique and so individually attuned to their own system.
Mm.
So I really see the work as inviting, really just sitting with someone and inviting them to slow down enough to have more and more access to what's really going on inside of them.
And can we talk a little bit about what it looks like in relationship to have a healthy exchange of anger?
Mhm. Yeah.
Let's say a
S-
couple, I know of a couple who they don't even realize it. They are
mhm,
constantly bickering. I mean,
mhm,
and it to me, like I enter the field and I'm like, ooh, but it's
mhm.
almost like they don't even notice anymore, the
Yeah. Huh?
darts flying back and forth. And I'm just curious. I mean, I guess maybe for them that's what works.
I
I,
don't know. Bickering is a good word, by the way. It was one of the ones I didn't mention before about, discharge of anger.
mm,
Um, so working, and I work with a lot of couples, and working with couples, it's really interesting because I do the same process, but slow it down enough so that we can get, hopefully, underneath what each person is feeling. So if we get away from the story, okay, a lot of the work that I do is, for most people, when they talk about working with anger, working with conflict, it stays very much in the story. You did this, I did that. A lot of blame, a lot of discharge, a lot of avoidance. No, none of that. If we just sit with each person, and sometimes you need a little bit of content, but content in service to going underneath what's happening for each of you. Because when there is anger in relationship, we lose contact with ourselves. We become very focused on what's going on outside of ourselves, maybe what we want to manage, how we want to fix it, how we want to get our way, we want to be heard. All this young stuff starts coming into the room. So if we, each person goes into slowing down and starting to get a sense of what's going on underneath the anger, what are the feelings that are here? What might be the need that's here? Then we can start to create a space where we understand better what's going through the other person's system, and perhaps even develop a bit of empathy or understanding for why they're holding the feelings they're holding. And if we're able to move through that and go through that process, then there's more space for whatever common ground there needs to be in order to kind of move through what each person is angry about.
but what you're saying essentially is that we give it to ourselves first, right? We
Yes.
bring it back to ourselves and
Hmm.
figure out what our own needs are so
Hmm.
that we can then step back into the relationship and
Right. Right.
have some empathy for what the other person.
Always starts with ourselves.
Hmm.
Always starts with ourselves. We can't extend ourselves to someone else, even have empathy for them to some extent, if we haven't come back to ourselves. and settled what's going on internally. Yeah.
In my experience, the angry person usually is taking up most of the energy in the room.
Hmm. Yep.
And what can we do, with that kind of energy? Let's say we don't have a choice. This person is in our
Hmm.
family, they're our boss,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it's just this kind of, I think of it sort of like that Tasmanian devil,
Uh-huh.
energy, right? Where it's not talked about necessarily, but you can feel its presence.
Hmm.
And how do we deal with that on a practical level?
Yeah, I mean, it becomes more challenging, of course, when it's not our job or the other person doesn't have enough conscious awareness to know what's going on. I find this is where the skills of just kind of slowing down and grounding and not engaging. Anger needs something to keep going, generally. It's like a fire that needs to be fed. And very often there's like a looking for someone to engage with and someone for that energy to land. And I think the more we can stay connected to ourselves and stay grounded and slow down the energy, very often that has some sort of effect on that person. And I'm not talking about doing anything to them. I'm just talking about being able to stay centered in oneself and do what we need to do to take care of ourselves. And I think sometimes that is looking at, oh my God, here's this rageful person. I start to feel scared. I start to feel irritated. I start to feel frustrated. So again, I kind of take a step back. I slow down. What am I feeling here? If I'm feeling frustrated, if I'm feeling angry, it's like, what's underneath that? Is it scary for me? Do I need to take a moment and assure myself that I'm safe? Am I sad that somehow there's never any contact with this person? And I would love there to be some contact. And again, I tend to what's here and not try to accelerate the situation or make that person be another way or calm them down or whatever. And then sometimes I think one needs to just detach from the space. If it's someone that just can't stop, or say something sometimes, but definitely to take care of oneself first
Hmm.
and then be able to say, I'm really feeling uncomfortable with the anger right now. And that person can do whatever they're going to do with that, but that may be a way that we have to advocate for ourselves.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm finding this really uncomfortable.
Hmm.
Just again, that is self-care. That is positive aggression and use of self-advocacy.
Hmm.
It's not a perfect system, because everybody, there are situations like that no matter what you do, it's not going to transform the space externally.
Sure, and it's what we're sensitized to, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I know when I was in college, we had a professor who was maybe he was from, I went to school in the South, but he was maybe from New York, I can't remember, but he was very abrupt. He wasn't
Hmm.
unkind. He was
Hmm.
just very sure of what he had to say, and I loved this guy. I mean, my classmates were terrified of him. And I was like, oh, I get it. He's really like very cuddly underneath, like I could see it because I had a
Hmm.
dad like that, like I could,
Hmm.
it's like I could see the vulnerability,
Hmm.
and the sadness, like he
Hmm.
didn't want to get too close,
Uh-huh.
he couldn't talk to me about it, but it was so obvious to me,
Hmm.
and so I found that actually, that kind of transference helped me in a way.
Yeah, it did. And you bring up something really important. And I don't know that we could always do this, but if we can see beyond the anger, that is also really helpful in a situation like that. If we can, like with my dad, who used to get angry about he loved to get angry. And, as I did more and more work, every time he would get into that place in himself, I would just see that young wounded part of him that was just probably most of his life felt like he was in over his head. And the anger just didn't have any real impact anymore. It was just like seeing a young person who was so frustrated with things and scared that they just didn't know what else to do with the energy. And I think for all of us, and I think we do this with our clients all the time, this kind of gets baked into the pie, right? Where you see a client and they come and they have all of what they're bringing to a session, and you're really aware underneath whatever those layers are that they're working through in their process. You see their essence, you see the core of who they are, you see the young part that is scared or struggling or not able to have their needs met. And it just opens one's heart to holding the space with compassion and allowing whatever's there to, have its way, until they find another way. Now, again, that could be a tall order when you're in a room and, somebody's raging around and not necessarily someone you have soft feelings for or a positive transference with in some way, but we do the best we can.
Yeah, it's a delicate approach I've found. Right.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
it's almost like you're walking towards a bit of a fire, right?
hmm
So, and
And fires burn.
fires burn, and they don't necessarily, I mean, in my experience, with clients and also other angry people in my life, they don't want you to see them. They don't want you to
hmm
see that wound.
hmm
They want you to see
No,
the fire that's
no,
protecting
no,
it.
because if you see it, then they have to see it in your eyes, and then they
Mm,
might have to feel it.
mm. So what you're saying, it sounds like, is that sadness and fear are so much more overwhelming for the system to
hmm
process than anger. So anger becomes
Yeah.
the default.
Right. Well, we develop our defense system in order to not feel the pain of the wound.
Mm,
So once we get into actually feeling the sadness, we're getting closer to the wound.
mm,
And again, unless someone is doing the work and agreeing to that, they may not necessarily want to go there. And even with clients, they especially in the beginning, they may not want to go there. There's such fear sometimes around whether they're going to feel engulfed by the pain or never find their way out of the pain or the pain is going to destroy them in some way. I mean, these are, faulty belief systems that come from our child consciousness. That we're just going to die if we feel this.
And is it ever the opposite, where a lot of sadness and sort of heaviness masks the anger underneath? Because in my experience, also as a woman, because it is unacceptable to be to even
hmm
be direct, I find that
hmm
people say that I'm very direct, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm just being myself. I don't know. I'm, there's sometimes there's no charge, for me. It's just
hmm
sort of how I express myself.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
What comes to mind is people that have like masochistic characterological makeup, and there is a heaviness or a moroseness or a negativity on the surface, and there's a lot of anger underneath that.
Mm,
It's just masked with another layer of the defense system. Very often, there's an attachment to negative pleasure. Nothing ever goes my way. I always have to be the one that does all the work. It never gets any. That's anger.
mm,
It's passive. There's a morosity to it. There's a negative pleasure to it, but it's anger, and you do feel it. So there's passive forms of anger, like sarcasm, passive aggressiveness, moroseness,
mm.
depression. Depression. If you deal with somebody who's incredibly depressed, clinically depressed, usually there's a lot of masking over anger. So
Mm.
then you have another layer basically to get through.
How do you work with somebody who for years has kind of entrained their system, not to express anger?
Slowly,
Mm,
slowly. And always, yeah, I'm always aware that, I have a lot of passion around work with anger, work with conflict. I just think it's very important work. I'm also very aware that it's not my job to make everybody do it.
Hmm.
So again, my job is always to follow the client's process, to really look at what best serves them, to really look at what their next healing step may be, and to invite that, and you know, and wait, really wait. I mean, if you sit with someone and they're able to start moving through their process, the anger shows up,
Mm.
or it doesn't, based on, the level of work that they're doing, and how much of their work, of their healing journey, they are with you for.
And what do you say to someone, especially in this healing realm, who says, "I have no anger in my system"?
Hmm. Okay. I'm not going to get into a fight about it. I mean, it's an angry expression.
Mm,
Now that would be a perfect place that you could get into a contest and get
mm,
your own anger fired up. I might say to them, I'm really curious about why you'd say that.
mm. Because
Because
none of
I
us
would be,
enjoy.
I'd be really curious why somebody would be so quick to say they're not angry.
Yeah, it makes people so uncomfortable, I guess, right?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Or just, I remember one time really, really early in my practice, first summer I was practicing, and somebody came in. I was working in a spa and doing healings, 8 hours a day or something. And somebody came in, and all I did was say the word boundary. And
Mm,
she kind of went apeshit on me.
mm,
And I mean, she really got nuts and very angry. I mean, I was like way out of my depth. I mean, I had graduated 2 months before or something. And I was just like, I'm sorry if you want your money back. If you don't want to have the energy treatment, you're free to go. I mean, I was just like, I was this little tiny treatment room. I was like, boundaries, I don't want to hear about boundaries. Okay, okay. It's like no contest here. It's like if you'd like your money back, they'd be definitely fine to give you your money back. We can cancel this. She stayed. She stayed. But it was just, I have these little vignettes in time when, I would say something totally that I think is not provoking, but you just never know.
mm,
Now I would handle that very differently, probably. I'd be really curious about why there was such a strong reaction to the word.
mm,
And whether she'd be up to sharing that or not, I don't know. But it wasn't a facilitation session. It was just for an energy healing.
mm.
But just it's fascinating. I just find people's emotions fascinating, and how we work so hard to try to manage it all.
Yeah. So, so you're saying it is a slow process getting from, discharging anger at
Hmm.
someone or something to bringing it back to the self, just,
Hmm.
uncovering our own needs and transforming it into creative life force.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about what it does look like when it's transformed and, what are some things that open up for us?
I think probably the thing that opens up the most is our ability to take care of ourselves in a different way. I think anger has the bad reputation of keeping us stuck sometimes.
Mhm.
So I really do feel that as we start to learn more about managing something that is so much a part of our day in and day out existence, I think it really does help us to, again, motivate, move forward in our lives, take care of ourselves, take care of our needs. I think it allows us to be in relationship in such a healthy way, where that is not this focal point of how many times I sit with people and they're afraid of saying something because somebody's going to get mad. How
Mm,
much of our own expression gets tamped down because somebody might get mad? It's amazing. And then what happens to our life force? Where does that stop? Where do you finally give yourself permission to take a risk? So I think the tools allow us to be able to be in relationship better, to manifest in our life better, to, I don't like the word become empowered, but I really feel that we can't authentically be fully who we are if there's, the boogeyman of anger in the corner that we don't want to deal with. And everybody else has that boogeyman in the corner, so we don't want to deal with them necessarily. So it just feels like it's such an integral part of our healing and our ability to function well in the world. And on the macro cosmic level, I think until we really start looking at the distortions around anger and how to heal that in ourselves, we really can't change things.
Hmm.
And I don't care if you're just looking to change things in your own little corner of the world, or you're meant for bigger things or a bigger audience or a bigger place to do your work. But it has to start somewhere.
Yeah, and I'm curious, what does anger feel like? What does healthy aggression feel like in the body? Because we know what,
Hmm.
that juicy
Hmm.
anger discharge feels like,
Hmm. Hmm.
most of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Couple of real differences. Discharged anger feels good for a moment, and then it's gone, and the body relaxes, and then you're looking for someplace else to discharge it. Okay. It's like having a potato chip. Oh, it feels really good. Now I want another one. That's going to keep going. Uh, when we talk about transformative life force of anger, that has an unlimited resource of energy. It's not, I'm going to just, I let that go and it feels really good. And then, like, where else can I do this? It really, it connects, it's grounded. It has nothing to do with anyone else. It has to do with how do I be so fully in myself and take care of this organism and devote it to whatever feels important, to whatever I have passion about, whatever I want to create here. So it's sustained in the body in a different way. Discharged anger, heart rate goes up, your energy pulls forward and up, or you get collapsed, or you get frozen. Yeah, again, that transformative anger is, I don't know how to describe it. It's a sensation of fullness. It's a sensation of being able to apply oneself to something that feels important and have the sustained energy to continue to follow it through.
Is it the energy? Is it the source of motivation, productivity, creativity?
I think it's very connected to our core essence. If we talk about creative life force, it's the core of who we are. And that's something that then when we connect it to our intention and our longing to bring something, to manifest something in the world, that that really is the creative process.
So
Yeah.
it's like the spark in a way.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
It connects us back to the spark of who we are.
Mm.
Yeah.
And can you give your opinion about exercises like the ones you mentioned where, we're hitting a wall or we're hitting a pillow,
Hmm. Hmm.
and how and whether those work or not?
I think they're discharges.
Mm.
I certainly understand that moving energy is important. I think if your body holds a lot of tension, if there's inflammation, if there's ways that your body gets tightened up and held, I think things like moving, like dancing, like metabolizing, I think those are helpful. As far as energy goes, I think it's a momentary pleasure. I think sometimes it feels really good to discharge anger. You know, I can rant and rave like as well as the next person. I do that sometimes. Feels really good to rant and rave, that when nobody's around and I just feel like ranting and raving, kind of like what you mentioned doing in the car. Feels good, okay. I'm still going to have to come back and do my work around anger though, because a discharge is really not transforming anything.
Hmm. It's the going deep within the stillness place, it sounds like.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the trans
right. It's coming back into, again, going through the layers of anger, feeling, need, wound, and then the reconnection with our life force.
Do you have any exercises in the program,
Hmm.
for like once that transmutation is happening,
Hmm.
the crucible, like that place, where is that the name? Is that the right word? Like where the mixture, is
Hmm.
happening
Or
and
the, yeah, yeah, I know the word you're looking for. The alchemy, maybe.
yeah.
So, I mean, the workshop on anger, transforming anger, goes through the learning the actual practice of doing this. I think once we get back to that place where we're connected to our creative life force, there, how we bring that forward into the world, that's another whole genre. It really is. The the workshop I just did, which is creativity and manifestation, talks a lot about what that process is around once we're connected to that spark and connected to what real longing is, and then how to really bring that into the world and manifest it. And that is like a continuation of this work.
And there is a sensation that goes with it though, right?
Mhm. Yeah, hard to describe in words,
Mhm.
but the workshops that I do, the workshop on anger, like all the workshops I do, are experiential. So we're not, you and I are having a discussion, and there's some you know, parallels or talking about energy and how things feel and the process of going through this, the steps of going through this. But it's a very different experience when you're in a room with a group of people and you start uh, uncovering, discovering who you are through this lens and understanding on a cellular level how to move through this process and how to become familiar with how each of these steps feels in your body, because it's different for everyone. Everyone has their own senses and ways of receiving and tracking their own information. So the work is very experiential, and one is able to then start to recognize in their body what each of these steps feels like and how to move to the next step.
Yeah, I'm just curious, in your workshops, do you have experientials where people are met with the sensation, the energy of anger so that they can understand what their response is?
Yeah, we work a lot with, and I've found that it can be really rewounding for people to put dyads together and do this type of work. I don't do that personally. What I do in the experientials is have you bring someone into your space, your awareness, someone that you have a particular transference with, someone who you're currently feeling angry with or feeling anger from a situation. So I have each person really stay in their own consciousness system with the people they choose to bring in and work with. Yeah, I think doing this type of work and having people in a room doing dyads and stuff like that intuitively does not feel useful. I
Mhm.
just think it's such a hot potato
Sure.
when it comes to transference and people that may or may not know each other, and that just brings um, another whole thing into it. And these workshops are based on an educational model, not necessarily going into those sorts of processes with others.
That makes sense.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about what negative health conditions might result from held anger?
hypertension,
Mm.
cardiac problems, kidney problems. Uh, I think any sort of autoimmune
Mm.
where the body is, you're basically attacking your own immune system,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
just to name a few.
Yeah, and I'm also curious in the practice, are you working with you're working with the energy system, right? Are you working specifically with specific chakras?
Not specifically.
Mm.
I'm working more with the dimensions, like the dimension of the core of who we are, the auric dimension, which is where our consciousness system lives, with the horic dimension, which is the dimension for intentionality. So I'm working more dimensionally than I am necessarily with the chakras, although people will feel things in different parts of their body and track things that way. Certainly, we slow down things so each person is able to receive the information that's valid for them in their relationship with anger, but I don't direct it to certain chakras in that way. A
Mm.
lot of people that come to my workshop are not, the chakra system is not something they're familiar with. So I
Mm.
try to keep it to kind of real basic terminology like our psychology, our intention, or the core of who we are.
Mhm. And do you recommend, that people go through this process with a facilitator, or is this something that, you know, you can try at home?
I would say always with a facilitator, just because there's so much around anger and there's so much trauma around it. And I think being able to explore this in what feels like a relatively safe space allows the support that I think we need in order to go into some of these places in ourselves.
Mhm.
So I think a guide is always a good choice.
Makes sense. Do you want to talk a little bit about what brought you into your interest in exploring this topic?
I guess just anything that I'm always curious about, anything that we want to turn our back on and not deal with or feel. I'm like one of those, you know. For some people, it's like, no, no, I don't want to go there. And I'm like, well, why don't I want to go there? What's so bad about going there? So, and I feel that way about the consciousness system and the feelings that we have. And I also feel it's a duty to the people I work with. You know, if I'm not willing to go there, how am I going to bring anybody else there? How am I going to be able to offer any support to anyone if I step away from that in myself? So I guess it's those two things.
And does it feel like a healing for you personally? You've mentioned that your dad was angry. Does that feel like it's related?
I guess it's funny. I have kind of an interesting relationship with anger. You know, I had like six uncles, and they were always angry about something. And anger was not something, although I remember getting under the table because they'd throw things sometimes, but they're
I shouldn't
Sicilian.
laugh, but
Yeah, no,
I get it.
I mean, we'd be under the table giggling because it wasn't, it was more this is the way they express themselves. And they were Sicilian, you know. And what I remember about anger was like there'd be these discharges and there'd be these fireworks that went on. And then, like a half hour later, they'd be singing and crying. And, you know, and it was just like, well, okay, now it's time for dinner. So, it was fascinating to watch, uh, curious to watch. And there was a lot of life force in that. So in a way, I'm lucky because it was never something that I found scary.
Mm.
Now, I've seen scary anger, for sure, things that are very scary, but anger in and of itself was never something that scared me because it was so normalized in the environment I grew up in. Now, my father's anger was a little different, because he would kind of take over the house. He did a lot of silent anger. So, you'd be waiting for the explosion, which was something else. I
Mm,
wouldn't say it was scary, but it was more like, let's not trip this one
mm,
because then we're all going to be uncomfortable for a lot longer.
mm,
And he'd take over the house with that kind of space.
mm.
So again,
Yeah.
not quite scary, just like it was
A little
uncomfortable to live in.
on edge. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it suppressed a lot of the energy or movement in the house. It controlled the energy a lot.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah. So a
yeah.
little bit different.
That's familiar.
Yeah.
But it sounds like with your uncles, it's almost like, a community that embraced the anger and then was able to release it
hmm
and like integrate it back in through song.
hmm
Sounds sort of beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it was all discharge, really. Somebody would just look at someone the wrong way and there'd be a little bit of an explosion, and then, somebody else would get triggered. And what was interesting when that happened is the women were always in the kitchen,
Mm,
off to the side.
yeah.
But again, there was this sense that the anger could happen, there could be a discharge, and then there was a coming together.
Mm.
I don't remember ever a time where there was an altercation where they stopped talking to each other or they avoided, it didn't, it always kind of came around again.
And it sounds like it must have, stayed within some kind of boundary and not gone to
hmm
maybe cruelty because,
hmm Yeah. Yeah. It was usually these, like I said, sometimes it was just looking at someone the wrong way. It was like, well, what are you looking at? What are you looking at? And then the ashtray would go, it's just like
oh my gosh, that sounds
yeah.
like a painting of how I grew up. What are you so happy for? Yeah.
uh, Families. But
Yeah.
again, we're a product of those environments for sure. Yeah,
Yes.
always.
If we find that we've been conditioned to whether it's discharge anger or hold anger in our system,
hmm
it's kind of worn a groove in our lives, but we can see it. What
hmm
what might be a first step?
Two-part. Recognize it and slow down.
Mm,
Three parts. Recognize it, slow down, and then be curious. Now that's so easy. I find that the skills that I teach are so simple, but anger, it speeds up the system. So something as simple as, okay, I'm getting activated. Let me take a breath. Let me slow down. And then let me slow down to get curious. What's here? Like breaking that down can sometimes be really difficult
mhm.
unless you've been practicing to some extent those sorts of skills. Yeah.
And have some self-compassion around it.
Yeah. Yeah. Just again, being openly curious, stepping outside of yourself and saying, wow, why am I activated? Why am I angry right now?
Mm,
What's what's going on here? And one has to have enough connection to themselves to be able to slow down and listen and listen. Because we're real quick going to, well, I'm angry because this person did that. No, 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 no. Come back again. Slow down. Right. Sometimes it takes doing that over and over and over again before we actually get here.
yeah, or going into self-blame, right? And then that
hmm
goes its own kind of cycle. Oh no, I should
Right.
be a better person. I should be good. I should
hmm
be angry.
hmm hmm Yeah. Sometimes it gets shut down that fast.
Hmm.
Oh, that's bad. That's bad. Why am I getting angry at that poor person? It's like, well, you're not getting angry at that poor person. You're angry.
Hmm.
How do you keep bringing it back? Again, we're so wired externally rather than internally.
Hmm.
So it's a whole redirect from what most of us do pretty automatically.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when my daughter was growing up and she was really little, I would say, it's okay to get angry. It's not okay to hurt people. I
Yeah.
don't even know if that was the right thing, but
No, I remember saying that to my niece. It's okay to be angry, but don't hit.
mhm.
And she
Hmm.
like, my nephew came home from the hospital. All she wanted to do was throw him off the couch, you know? It's like the morning he was born, I went to babysit for my niece. She was 2.5, and she was playing with her doll. She had some little doll she was playing with. And I said to her, "So Elizabeth, you have a new baby brother. Yeah, how do you feel about that?" And she just looked at me and she went over with her doll, and she threw it in the garbage pail.
Yeah,
Okay, then, got it.
that's pretty clear and honest.
She didn't say a word.
Yeah,
Just went over with the doll and threw it in the garbage pail. Okay, there you have it.
smart cookie.
Yeah, yeah. I'll never forget that. It was incredible.
Um, yeah, and just quickly, to recap on positive aggression, you called it.
Hmm.
So positive aggression and how that feels in the system is energizing or
It's energizing. There's a sense of well-being,
mhm,
okay, where negative aggression is outwardly based. Right? I want to do something out there. I want to get some, I want to discharge something out there, control something out there. Positive aggression has more of a sense of well-being because it's so much aligned with self-care, self-advocacy, creating healthy boundaries, being able to manifest from our intention and longing. So it's not, again, it's not like it's outwardly projected. It's not external. It is really about advocating for this organism that we have and the needs that it has and the longings that it has. So very different, very different. And we're utilizing our healthy masculine for those things.
and I think the most interesting equation here is that we know from the practice that, you know, we know that that kind of internal self-care is what
Mhm.
helps us be of service to the
Mhm.
world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
When we follow our own
Mhm.
impulses and
Yeah. Yeah. And making space for our needs to be, going back to what you said about self-love, it's a great demonstration of active self-love,
Mhm,
right? Because if you're securing that need for love and contact in yourself, you will do what's necessary. You will motivate what's necessary in order to take care of this organism.
mhm,
Mhm. And that isn't just being in the space, wonderful feminine, energy of being in a space with oneself. But if we're going to interface with the world, if we're going to be functional in the world, we have to go into the world. And that we need that energy in order to take care of ourselves and be able to go into the world in a healthy way.
mhm.
Mhm.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Joy. This was really illuminating and a beautiful conversation. I so enjoyed it.
Mm. Thank you so much, Stacy. Thank you for taking the time and the energy to have this conversation and to bring the work that you're doing into the world.
Thank you. See you next time.
See you next time.